Well, yes. I mean, yeah, the Crown Maker of Budapest. This is a question actually that most people, how did you end up in Budapest? I said, well, I was in the movie industry, and we made a film here, and that's where I stayed. But it was, like most of my life, completely unplanned. I never planned anything, and I certainly never planned to be in the film industry. And when I was at school, in my high school, I mean, I could never learn from books at all. And the closer it came to leaving school, and you've got to find a job, and I thought by some magic that it would suddenly there would be a revelation, but there never was. Yet lots of people around me, quite a lot of people around me, their parents were in business, for example, and I don't know, they were a jeweler or an accountant, and they would be going to university. Well, I knew I would never go to university. I didn't have that mental, I wasn't clever enough. I came at the bottom of my class, or close enough to the bottom for it not to matter. There were 32 in my class, and if I got to number 29, I thought I was doing quite well. And I had a friend too. They had the same problem. He could never learn from books, but to the point actually where the teacher said, well, look, go into the other room and teach yourself. I can't teach you. But of course, nobody ever said that to me, of course, because I couldn't have done it. But he was too intelligent to be in this. And he became a nuclear scientist, actually. But no, I never knew what I wanted to do. And I came from a children's home. And then came the beginning of the war, where all the children were taken from London, because it was London, this children's home. And I found myself with a new mum and dad, and it was a very working class environment, where I had a mother, a wonderful, wonderful lady, but she'd never read a book, she'd never seen a movie. The only thing she did was to clean the house, and she could never understand a job that didn't encompass working in a shop, working in an office, or working in a factory. Those were the three options you had. But of course, we know that there are many, many more options, But and so I worked in an office. I had this terrible job working in a lawyer's office, sitting on a big stool in an old-fashioned, and it was a job.
How did you like it?
Not particularly, no. In fact, my dad once said to me, "Oh, how are you liking your job?" I said, "Well, I don't." And my mum said, "But you're not supposed to like your job." And I thought, well, what is there in life if you don't like your job?
Yes.
And it's what you do to earn your living, And I thought there has to be more to life than that, But I went into the RAF. I did 2 years military service, which we all had to do, And
Royal Air Force.
I was in the Royal Air Force, yeah, and never saw an aeroplane. And I was an office. I was put into an office, like hundreds of other people, you know, filing away documents and so on and so forth. And then when I came out, I had a very good voice. I was a very good singer. And so I joined an operatic society, and so I began to get people around me that had the same interests as myself. But I just knew. And then I got another job. After I came back from the RAF, they're obliged to take you, the job you had before, they're obliged to take you back. And so I went back to the lawyer's office, by which time I didn't work on the telephone and all that. I was in the insurance stuff. But again, it was not me at all, you know. But what was me, I don't know. I had no idea. You know, when does this magical moment come when, you know, I know what I want to do? But it never came.
It never came.
Well, I saw an advertisement for a person to be an assistant manager in a fabric shop selling dress fabrics. And I thought, well, that sounds quite nice. You know, it's certainly different to this one. And it turned out, actually, that I happened to be very good at it, selling fabrics. Of course, I knew nothing about fabrics, but you learn, you know. I was 20 years old, and I became the blue-eyed boy of the company. Then they had 6 shops altogether. And it turned out, well, I mean, when I first went, you had to serve customers with fabrics. They come to your shop to buy dress fabrics, and they have a pattern, and they want, you know, and you have all the fabrics behind you, and they want blue with white spots. So if they haven't got blue with white spots, you turn around and give them something quite different. And I was very good at persuading them to have something quite different to blah, 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 blah. Well, then a new shop opened in the same group, and they wanted me to manage it, which I did for about 5 or 6 years. And then I decided that I didn't actually quite like working for other people. They weren't very nice people. I was my own boss. My own boss. I had 6 or 7 girls working under me, and so on and so forth. And then they wanted me to move somewhere else, but my dad had just died, and I thought, well, I knew that I had to go back to London. Although I'd had a very happy childhood in a tiny town of 5,000 people, but it's an environment, the working class environment, for my mother anyway, is what will people think? What will people say if you do something different? You know, it's very rigid.
Yes.
You know, what will people say? What will people think? And people will laugh at you. Well, I didn't give a monkey about what people. Well, of course, I did think. Of course, you do. What people think of you, of course, is important. But it wasn't so important to me that I wouldn't be different, and I was different, and I used to wear different sorts of clothes. I'd go to London, and it was the swinging 60s, or close to it anyway. And so anyway, I decided that I would go to London, and I'd seen an advertisement for an antique shop. This guy wanted a partner in an antique shop, and I bought a half share in an antique shop, and I knew nothing about antiques. And if anything says anything about my whole life, it is doing things that I know nothing about. The film industry, for example. I knew nothing about films when I came into films. I joined the film industry out of desperation because my business failed, my antique shop, and you learn nothing. There is no better way to learn than to fail. You always expect to succeed. You know, you don't go into something, whatever it is, expecting to fail. You expect to succeed. So it's no surprise when you succeed. But it's a great surprise when you fail. You know, and suddenly it brings you up very short, you know, and so you learn much more from your failures than you do from your successes. And this has gone on through the whole of my life. Well, the failure of my antique shop. Now, perception, I mean, is everything. Now, I had my antique shop. It looked very... this guy who I bought a half share in was a crook. And so I had to get rid of him. And by one means or another, I bought him out for almost next to nothing. And he was glad to go, actually. He was really an actor. And so here am I with an antique shop, and I know nothing about antiques. And I had a client. His name was Gordon Hales. And he would buy the odd thing that would keep me going for paying another week's rent. But before that happened, I always dressed very smartly. I have some pictures here. You know, I always dressed in black polo neck sweater, black suit. I looked the picture of success, because perception is everything. You hold your head up, you know, you act in a confident way, and people think you are a success, because that is the perception you give. Yes, you know inside you that you are failing miserably, and that any moment now, passing the window, will come the man with the writ from the courts to say that you have to be in court next week unless you pay this £20 that you owe people. And I am living with this inside me, yet a person comes in and I'm saying, "Hi, how are you? You know, can I get you a cup of tea or a cup of coffee?" And I remember two Americans coming in one day. And I talk. The one thing I never adopted was the regional accent of my old hometown, where I got this Queen's English, the perfect intonation and diction from. I have no idea. I didn't know. I learned so many years later. And in my small town, it was all regional, a regional accent. Oh, you know, all that stuff, you know, you could barely understand them, you know. And in the next town, only 2 miles away, it would be slightly different. And you could recognize the people that were from Rothwell and the people who were from Desborough, only 2 miles away. But I never had this. And people quite often said, "Oh, and my name wasn't Mark, it was Arthur. That was my birth name, but I never liked it. So it was an opportunity when I came to London to change my name, which I did, to Mark. And people were always saying how posh I talked, you know. And where this posh came from, I have no idea. But to get back to this, a couple came in one day, and of course I am smartly dressed, and which is very important. Again, the perception of success is that everything is polished, everything looks pristine, your windows are clean. See, my windows are not very clean here, but anyway, when you're selling, you know, in your shop, everything must look perfect, including yourself. And this American couple came in and they're looking around and they said, wow. I wish I could see where you lived, as if I lived in a country house, you know, with servants. Well, I lived round the corner in a rooming house with one room and a little gas cooker. Sometimes I couldn't afford to put a coin in the cooker. But I gave the appearance of, you know, I said to them, I remember, yes, I'm sure you would, you know. And so this was the perception of success. And all through my existence, and there were many changes until I came into the film industry, and I came into the film industry very late. And people assumed, again, assumption and perception, that I knew everything about, oh yeah, we need the so-and-so and so-and-so and blah, 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 blah. And I, the fuck they talking about? And so I had to go quickly, and there's nobody I could ask. Otherwise I gave myself away, that I actually knew nothing about movies. But I've learned since then that many people were like me. You know, that they had to pretend. People who you would think, I've worked with very famous people, you know, and well, you don't know, but I have, you know, if you're making a big movie, then you work with quite important people, like Anthony Hopkins, for example. And he always has this mantra. I've heard him say it because I've worked with him for 3 or 4 months, you know. Oh, one day they will find me out. And because acting, I think, came quite easily to him. I mean, he's a brilliant actor and a wonderful man as well, actually. And so I understood exactly what he meant, you know, because I'm working in things that I know nothing about. I know nothing about antiques. Will they find me out, you know, that I know nothing? You know, I had to learn, and quite often, of course, people who came into the shop knew much more than I did, you know, so they would look at something and blah, blah, blah. But this man that I talked about, called Gordon Hales, and he used to buy a few pieces and so on and so forth, and we became great friends, and we used to go out drinking together just for a glass of wine or something. And but he was very eccentric. And then one day he said, look, you know many artists, because my assistant lived in a house where there were students from the Slade School of Art. And so Gordon said, you know, I wonder if there are people in there who know, who will know someone who can make a bust of somebody in bronze. I said, well, I'll ask and find out. And, well, first of all, he said, my boss, we were having dinner together, my boss wants a bust of his leading lady. I said, Gordon, tell me, well, what do you do for a living? This is the first indication I had. He said, well, I'm a film editor. I said, well, who is your boss? He said, Charles Chaplin. I said, Charles Chaplin? I said, but, you know, I said, we've been, how long have I known you? Almost a year, maybe. And you've never once. He said, well, it's just what I do. Well, of course, much later on, I would understand that, because I would work with Anthony Hopkins and Judi Dench and Emma Thompson and lots of well-known people, and I would never bother to tell my friends that I'm working with this person or that person, because that's just what I did. And this was the same with Gordon. So I said, well, I'll look around and see if I can find one or two people who could do a bust, and maybe they could do some. I said, by the way, who is the leading lady? He said, it's Sophia Loren. I said, shit, you know. I said, okay, well, I'll find. And so I did. I found about 3 or 4 artists who did some sketches and so on and so forth. And so he didn't have to do this. He said, well, look, we have a portfolio of sketches now. He said, would you like to come to the studios, which was in Pinewood Studios in London, where they made the Bond movies, as a matter of fact. And he said, you can present them to Sir Charles. And of course he could quite easily have taken them himself. He said, but no, it's better you go, and you could talk to him. You know, I said, wow, I'm going to meet Charles Chaplin, for fuck's sake. And so we went, and it's the first time I'd been through the gates of a film studio, Shepperton Studios, and everybody walking around with costumes, and they were actually making a Bond movie, You Only Live Twice. And there was the construction, which they were making for this movie, Bond movie, and so on, and the people dressed up in whatever costumes they were, and so on. And so we went into Gordon's editing suite, and of course it's a time where it wasn't on computers, it was great rolls of film, you know. And so I had the portfolio, and Gordon just showing me, you know, what happens. And then the phone rang, and he said, yes, Sir Charles, Mr. Rimmell is here. So he said, let's go and meet Sir Charles. So I thought, wow, my gosh, you know. And so we walked along the corridor, and there's the notice, Sir Charles Chaplin, director. And we walked into there, and there's this old man sitting behind a desk, and Gordon is talking about the film first of all, and I sit down and have a cup of coffee on the sofa, and then Gordon said, oh, Sir Charles, if you take them and show them, and well, just show them to him, you know. There's not a lot I could say. It was in the drawings, you know. I mean, I didn't realize until many, many years later, until I came into the film industry myself, that at the end of a movie, it was not unusual for a director to present the leading lady with a gift. It could be a piece of jewelry, it could be, but I can only assume that maybe Sophia Loren had been asked what she would like as a gift at the end of the film, which was called Countess from Hong Kong. And she had chosen a bust of herself, you know. Well, more surprises, or one surprise. So Sir Charles is looking through the things. He said, well, look, it's not only me that's paying for this, I think I better ring Marlon. Well, I only know one Marlon. He said, because he is also sharing the cost of this. Wow. So 5 minutes later, knock at the door, in comes, and there's the man himself, Marlon Brando. And so he is making the film with Sophia Loren. He is playing a diplomat and whatever. And then the surprise, because then Sir Charles said, oh, let's go to lunch together. And there's a director's dining room and a leading man, you know, where all the leading lighting, and a special dining room for, you know, the directors and so on, and leading people. And so off we went, and so there's Sir Charles Chaplin on the left over there, there's Marlon Brando over there, and I'm sitting here, Gordon is sitting there, and so we're having dinner, we're having lunch, and people are coming and going, oh, Marlon, you know, Sir Charles, and all this stuff going on. And but I'd seen this great construction, which was actually the Bond movie set, which was a volcano, and it's supposed to be set in Japan. And inside was all sorts of stuff going on, but outside, of course, it was scaffolding. And I'd said to Gordon, I said, oh my gosh, I said, I would love to take a look inside. You know, he said, no way, it's all very secret. Nobody is allowed inside there at all. So as we're walking back, well, we were having lunch together, and I said to Marlon didn't have very much to say to Charles Chaplin. I gather that they were not the greatest of friends, and I read about it much later, that Charles Chaplin was a monster, and that this is Marlon Brando writing about him. And anyway, so they were not friendly at all. And so Gordon's talking to Charles, and I'm just having some words with Marlon. And during this course of this sort of conversation, which I can't remember, the only thing I can remember is saying to Marlon, well, Marlon, you know, because he asked me to call him Marlon. And I said, you know, I could never be an actor. He said, why don't you think you could be an actor? Why couldn't you be an actor? I said, because I could not stand the rejection. He said, well, let me tell you just one thing. There's no such thing as acting. There's only being. And then, as quick as a lightning, Charles Chaplin said, well, Marlon, I wish you'd done more acting and less being this last 3 months. And then we got up and we left, and Gordon is walking with Sir Charles in the front. I'm walking with Marlon, just walking back. And we passed by this great construction, which is the Bond movie set for You Only Live Twice. And so I said to Marlon, I said, well, I said, you know, I've never been in a film studio before. And I said, this is a Bond movie, for goodness sake, you know. I said, I would love to be up and to be able to look inside, but I know it's just very secret because the security man are there. He said, so he said, come with me. And so I came with him. We climbed this great gantry up to the top, and the security man was, oh, Mr. Brando. He said, this is my friend, and he wants to have a look inside. Can you take him in? And I said, of course. So he said, okay. And he just said goodbye, and I never saw him again, but I did see the inside of this set. And then because we'd had this success with, well, I have a photograph. Oh, there it is. That's a photograph of Sophia Loren that was made for her. And my assistant lived in this house with all these students, and they came in to see, and they'd heard that I'd done this, that one of their friends would be doing the bust of Sophie Loren. I don't know the name of him at all now, it's all forgotten. But I managed to get a photograph of it. I didn't see the thing in situ at all. So they suddenly came up with I had a basement. My antique shop was no bigger than this. And in the corner over there were 2 doors that you opened up like this, and there was a basement which was filled with dust and rubbish, and I never went down there, you know. I think I'd looked at it once and closed it up, and it had furniture on the top of it. And well, they wanted, of course, the students, they said, oh, what's down there, you know? I said, it's rubbish, you know. He said, can we go and have a look, you know? I said, yeah, sure, go down. And so they came out, they said it would make a wonderful art gallery. I said, well, I know nothing about antiques. And since I don't know anything about art, if you can put it into order, you know, paint it, clear it, let's open an art gallery. So we opened an art gallery, the Rimmell Gallery. And sure enough, of course, I didn't know anything about it, but again, perception is everything. And we used to have, I designed no, I didn't design, somebody else designed a little catalogue. I had one of them here still from that time, 1968 I think it was. Yeah, I was 35 years old, maybe a little less than that. Anyway, and they said, well, and the first exhibition actually was, I said, well, look, since we're going to have we have to have a first exhibition. Since you 6 guys from the Slade School have been responsible for doing all the work, for which I paid absolutely nothing because I didn't have any money. In fact, Christopher had to go out and work in a pub because I couldn't afford to pay him most of the time. But he actually came from my district, you know, and he wanted to come to London with me. And he said, oh, I want to move to London. I want to, you know, if ever there's an opportunity, this was before he came, you know, can you call me? And I needed an assistant because my partner had gone, you know. And I needed to get out and to go to antique markets and antique fairs and auctions and learn about antiques and, you know, and so on. And so anyway, the first exhibition was a mixed exhibition of these guys from the Slade School of Art. But they said, look, you should have one of the students is a real fantastic guy. And but he will only, I know he will only consider a one-man exhibition because he's a bit up himself. I said, okay, well, introduce me to him, you know. And so they introduced me to a guy named Derek Jarman. Now, Derek Jarman has become world famous as a film director, and he died of AIDS actually when he was about 55. But in between times, he became very, very famous. And anybody in the UK who knows anything about art, anything about movies of the period, will know Derek Jarman. And so I gave an exhibition, the first exhibition of Derek Jarman. And we did sell some stuff, and, you know, and but all this went over a period of 6 or 7 years, and you know, we had oh Lord this and Lady that, and Paul McCartney would come in, but anyway, he did come in, and we went downstairs, and I made a cup of tea, I think, or a cup of coffee, and we sat and talked about, certainly not about music or anything. We just chatted. And he was usually there for about 15 minutes, and he might buy a picture, and he might buy something upstairs, and so on. So that was that. And you were always getting famous people through the door, particularly eccentric people. And I am obsessed. No, I'm not obsessed at all. But eccentric people, I adore eccentric people. I mean, it did come the time when I knew that this had to end. You know, my gallery, my antique shop, more and more my bank was saying, you know, you have to pay the money back that you owe us, you know. And because I used to go and borrow money, then it was much easier to borrow money. And of course I went, perception again is everything, you know. Here I have this lovely antique shop, that the manager had come and to see this antique shop, you know, and that I'm going to open an art gallery, and I had write-ups in the newspaper. I was very good at writing to newspapers and making stories. Some of, you know, always there was a grain of truth in it, and then you embroider it. And they love a story, you know, and people like a success story, and I was the success story, except I wasn't, of course. Everybody, you know, in the area thought that I was the great, not the great, but, you know, was a successful person, you know. And in my hometown, they also thought the same thing. And I think, but there was a desire to succeed. And I think to be recognized. It's only when you look back, when you get older. I'm 90 years old. So there's not a lot of looking forward. Although I still look forward because I'm making some jewelry and I'm planning to do whatever it is. But sometimes I have to tell you, I walk up the stairs to my bedroom here and I think, will I be walking back again? You know, that's what happens when you get old. And so there's a lot of, when you get older, there's a lot of looking back. And it's only when you look back that you can actually see the big picture. And one of the pieces of the jigsaw of the big picture was my voice. Now, my voice has changed considerably. It's now got an older voice, as you can, you know, it's but I had a wonderful voice. I mean, a singing voice. That's one of the I've had few regrets in my life, actually. I will tell you about one of them. But I'm writing my autobiography. And I'm writing a story. Actually, I recently, my little hometown of 5,000 people, which is now 20,000 people, which is quite a big town, you know, in the countryside. And they've discovered me. In fact, I was thinking of this before you came about success and failure, you know. I had so many failures. But if you were to ask me, which you haven't done, and why should you ask anyway, but if anybody were to ask me, you know, would you consider yourself in the big picture to have been a success? And I would have to say, well, yes, because I have been a success as a human being. There are people out there now whose lives have been changed. A little boy in Turkey who could not walk. He was 8 years old. He had a withered leg. And I made it possible for him to walk by giving him an operation and blah, 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 blah. There's a young man in the Philippines, Herman Dilgodico, his name is. I've never met him in my life before. But I'd met a guy, he was a teacher on exchange. The Filipino teacher would come to London and this London teacher would go to the Philippines. And I met him, I don't know, it was probably in a casual situation. And, you know, what do you do? Where, you know, where do you be? Blah, 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 blah. And it was this, and he said, well, actually, I've just been to the Philippines and I just done a 2-year exchange course, or a year, I don't know. And we're talking about it, and I said, oh, what was it like? And it was interesting, and da-da-da-da. He said, but one of the great tragedies is that you find that there are really, really talented and intelligent people who could never get an education because they don't have the money. You have to pay. And they come from little villages and they have to go back to their little village. And that's where they will live and make some sort of a living. And he said there's one young man, he comes from, the city in Philippines is Iligan City. And this, he said, he took the entrance examination and has passed with, you know, the top honors. But no money. The family has nothing. So I said, well, what happens? He said he has to go back to his village. Because he has no money to pay the fees for the education. He has no money to pay for a room, and every now and again they have to pay money to go on certain things, you know. I said, well, can I get in touch? How can maybe I can help him. And it was at a time actually when of course there was a time when I couldn't help anybody, financially I mean. But then I was in the movies, and so I began to earn money, and I thought, you know, for the sake of money, this person could have an education, you know. So I said, well, can you give me the name of of the head of the university? You know, it could be anybody, you know, you have to be a little careful. And so they gave me, and I managed to get in touch with this head of the university, and I said I'd been talking to so-and-so and so-and-so, and he has been telling me about a young man called Herman Dilko. He said, oh yeah, yes, Herman Dilko, that's a sad story. And I said, well, I'm ringing you because I just wonder if it's possible for me to help. But I don't know how much this help will cost. I said, and one cannot just call up and promise to do something and not continue with it for 4 years. It's a 4-year project, you know. And suddenly you find you don't have the money to continue, you know. Well, I knew I had the money to continue because I was in movies and earning quite a lot of money, and I don't have children, I am not married, and so on and so forth. And so you have to, you know, surely there's something you must do with your life to change somebody else's life, you know. So I said, well, what's the cost, and da-da-da-da, and he said, well, so and so and so and so. And I said, well, maybe I could contact Herman Dilko on the, you know, on the computers and so on, and well, he was just in floods of tears, you know, that because I had to make the decision, and I couldn't withdraw that, you know, and so every month I would go to Western Union. I always remember I was an expert with Western Union. So anyway, he graduated, and 7 years ago now. So now he is head of production, and it was a course in theatre studies, and he is the head of the theatre study, the head producer. He is greatly successful, and he contacts me occasionally, and but this has happened several times, and so. You know, I mean, I'm not saying this to make myself, you know, elevate myself in any way, but I actually say it because of this business of, you know, would you consider yourself to be successful? And I would say, yes, I am successful, but as a human being, you know, and I give to the charity for Ukraine, and I support the bears in Asia, you know, I don't know whether you've heard of them, but they have them in their cages all their lives to take out the stuff, you know.
Kidneys.
Yeah, and we can save them, you know. And so every month I give to about 4 charities every month. And so anyway, yes, but it's a great failure as a businessman. I have fantastic ideas, really very, very good ideas, but I can never, it's as if there is a great barrier between me and, between the idea and the carrying it out. And I am hopeless, I'm just hopeless. You know, I have all this jewelry, for example, you know, but I did take when I finished the film industry, I knew a lady, a young jeweler in Folkmixa, and And she said that Gujda Udvar is going to open, and it's going to be jewelry, you know. She said, why not take a table with me and with my jewelry, you know. And of course the jewelry happened sort of by accident. I finished filming with Hellboy. I said, that's finished now. So I began to make jewelry in my style, you know. I could never learn it from books. That's hopeless, you know. And I was really successful for 6 years. And then other people came in that rather took the quality down, you know. And I said, no, it's not for me. And then I began to sell maybe on eBay and so on and so forth. And then a man came up to me in 2013, and this is how the Crown Maker of Budapest happened. He said, oh, I've been told about your jewelry, that you make interesting things.
So
with people generally, I mean, it's just not to give up, you know. It's to be, you just have to be persistent. This doesn't apply to me. Well, it does apply to me, but I wasn't. And I was lucky in the sense that the moment of my greatest sort of failure, if you like, or no open doors, a door would open. And there was only one option, is to walk through it. And I became of an age, for example, I worked in a photo studio for 10 years. And the antique shop had finished and so on, and I had a great friend, Samantha, who had been an actress, but didn't act, you know, like many people and so on. And she worked in a photo studio as their representative. Quite an important person there, you know. She said, look, why don't you come and design a backdrop for a particular advertisement, you know. I said, I've never been in a photo studio before. Of course, you could do it, you can do it, you know. I thought, well, what is there to lose? Nothing. And so I went in, and of course they assumed, and of course you have to walk in with your head held high and, hi, how are you? And they assume that, of course, you know everything about, you know, you've had experience, you know. They're not looking for a CV. I don't think there's one time I ever gave anybody a CV. Not once. Because the CV was me. You know, the way you walk, the way you're bearing, the way you smile. And being liked is so important. No point in, you know, all this stuff. When you feel like crying, go in with a smile. How are you? You know. Oh, wow, you know. I do this still, not for any other reason than, for example, I will go into Toscana and I might see a group of people over there sitting, and they're obviously tourists, you know. And so I say, wow, you're having a party, can I come and join? I don't mean to join them at all, of course, you know. But then I sit down and they say, well, you know, and it begins. The 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and we have laughs, and I tell them stories, and how did you come to live here? That's the big one, you know, for them. I said, well, you know, I came to live here because I was in the movie industry. Oh, movie industry, what did you do? Yeah, so I did lots of this, and, you know, have you heard of Jeeves and Wooster? I did all the Jeeves and Woosters, and if they're of a certain age, they would know this big series, you know. and set in the 1930s, and Death on the Nile. Have you seen Death on the Nile with so and so? I said, well, I did that. I was the set decorator and all that stuff, and blah 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 blah. And I mean, you don't make such a big deal of it, but they make a big deal of it, as a matter of fact, that they'd met somebody who actually worked with Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson and Daniel Day-Lewis and so on and so forth, and so you tell stories, and quite often they're there for an hour, and they don't want, and they said, oh, we've got to get the bus, we don't want, shall we not go on the bus, because this is, I said, you have to go on the bus, you're on holiday, and then I say to them, just look up Crown Maker of Budapest, which I was talking about actually. And so this man came up to me, this is in 2013, and I had I still had a table at Gush de Odvar, and an Italian man, and he said, oh yeah, somebody's told me about your jewellery, and he said, every year there's an event called the World Top Model, and it's held in a different country every year, and in 2013 it will be held at the Buddha Hotel, and there will be 35 models competing for the prize of €250,000 contract, and he said, would you make the crown? I said, well, I've never made a crown before, but you have months to do it, This was June, and it wasn't till December. I said, I will, I'll take a crack at it, and if you don't like it, you don't have to use it, it is no problem. And so I made it, and they were so thrilled with it that they put me on the jury, and I ended up crowning the world top model. Only because the man who should have crowned her got scared at the last minute and pushed the crown into my hand, and so I crowned the lady. You could see it on. And so I began, I thought, oh, I love making crowns. I seem to have a talent for making crowns. And so that began my crown making, not for selling at all, but just for making, And I never wanted to sell them, I never made them to sell at all, and so that became my next step in this sort of development of, and then the music promos, but I was never into pop music, although actually I became a singer because I was desperate. Always desperate, and in fact was offered an audition with Decca Records. Unfortunately, it was another man that got the contract, and then this is when I had my antique shop, which was failing miserably, and so it was, one goes backwards and forwards, and there was this real, very camp bunny. I think he'd been in show business at one time, and he had an antique shop close 2 streets away. And of course he knew that I'd had an audition with Decca Records, and that happened quite by accident. I was with a friend, and we were in a very, very exclusive gambling club. But downstairs they had a cocktail bar, and a friend of mine, a Jamaican piano player, had a season there for 3 months. I said, oh, Mike, I won't be able to see you, and come and listen to you, And he said, yeah, if you walk in, I'm along the corridor and I'll sign you in, This is one of the most exclusive places in London. Upstairs, it's an 18th century house. Upstairs where the people lost millions, But downstairs was the cocktail bar. So I went there with a friend called Pat, who was an eccentric, of course. And And so we went in there, and Mike always vamped. There's one song that nobody else sang. Everybody sang My Way. Well, when I did the clubs, I always did you have to do My Way. You know, it became a, you know, you just had to do it, you know. But anyway, so we were at this 18th century building, and a song that I learned, because every week I would go to a music man to run through songs, because I didn't have people kept asking me to do clubs for which they would pay me. And I always said no, but then I needed the money. And so I said yes, but I didn't have a repertoire. And so this man in Leicester Square in London, I used to go to him every week, and we would add songs to my repertoire. I was having a session one afternoon with this man in Leicester Square who played for me for an hour, and he said, "There's a song that's been written for you." I said, what do you mean? He said, "Well, there's a show coming from Broadway, and there's a song in it that is, you will run away with it, you know." Well, of course, not on the stage, but, you know, it was called If I Were a Rich Man from Fiddler on the Roof. And so this became the song that Mike would vamp. And I knew when I went into a club, Mike would suddenly begin the and then he didn't. A friend of mine here, ladies and gentlemen, I hope he's going to get up and sing. And so I would, "Oh Lord, you made many, many poor people. I realize, of course, it's no great shame to be poor, but it's no great honor either. Would it be so bad if I had a small fortune? If I were a rich man," and so it went on, you know. And so this became my song, because not many people sang this song. And so we were in this casino, and suddenly he began. I thought, oh no. Well, it was called the Persian Room, you know, and next door was a restaurant where, you know, with wonderful service, and up 18th century staircase was where all the money was lost, and one maybe. And so he began to vamp this song, you know. And so I had to get up and I had to sing it, and all the people began to crowd into the doorway. The waiters stopped in the doorway, and it was like something from a Hollywood movie, you know. And everybody cheered when I finished, and they wanted more, but of course that was the only song we did together. And so Pat, her husband, was a songwriter, but they're divorced. Pat Mason. Barry Mason was who wrote The Last Waltz and Delilah and songs for Tom Jones and Engelbert Humperdinck. And she said, "I never knew you could sing." I'd never sung when we'd been out together at all, because we hadn't been with Mike, you know, we'd been at other places. And so she said, "I'm going to get in touch with one of the A&R men at Decca Records." And so she did, and sure enough, "Yeah, come along and do an audition." And so I went along, and I came out, and they said, she said, "They think you're wonderful, and they'll send you for a photographer, and you must wear glasses, obviously without, you know, they will make sure you have these glasses without da-da-da-da-da." And then every Monday, I said, "What?" Oh, and then they said, they want you to do a recording test at the studios. And so off, they gave me a time, 10 o'clock in the morning. That's not good time, you know. But anyway, that's 10 o'clock in the morning at Decca Records. And then they told me they wanted me to do one particular song and then a couple of songs. And so I said, "What happens now?" They said, "Well, every Monday they have a demo disc of what you've done And there are many A&R men, you know, at the recording companies, you know. And they will sit round a table, maybe 10 of them, and they all have the discs, and they will hear you, and they will have a photograph of you, and they will listen to you, and so on. And, well, Bunny, this show business person, I told him, you know, that I was having this, and he said, wow, you know. And so he came round, he said, what happened? I said, no, another guy has got the contract. And it was between me and somebody else called Solomon King, who I'd never heard of, and you'd never heard of him. And but it turned out much later on that I looked him up, because then we didn't have this thing, and you could Google him, you know. And I thought, well, this is years, you know, 30 years later. I thought, well, I wonder who he was, you know. Well, he was part of the backing group for Elvis Presley. He was the first white singer to be a backing group for Billie Holiday. I mean, what chance do I stand, you know, because he was a professional singer, you know. And he did a song called She Wears My Ring, as a matter of fact. But it was a song that perfect for me, and I added it to my repertoire as well. And so Bunny said, well, look, I know the head A&R man at EMI Records. I'm going to contact him. I said, okay, fine, you know. I wasn't up in the world about it, you know. And so, sure enough, can you be at EMI Records at 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon? And I had to do the Cross Abbey Road, the famous Abbey Road that the Beatles made famous with their record. You know, it's on the front cover of their LP. And so I went, and they said, okay, it's the Studio A, which is the big studio where the Beatles recorded, as a matter of fact. And he said, but there's an orchestra there at the moment recording, so you'll have to go round. This is the man at the door. And he said, there'll be a green light, and he said, just go in and walk and sit at the back. And I sat, and it's going on, this recording. And after 45 minutes, I'm getting more and more terrified. And I saw the green light go up, and I got up, and I walked, and I went out. And I think, what would have happened? And I never give myself the chance. And that's the one and only time that I've ever, you know, not done it, if you like. And so how would life have changed? I have no idea. Who knows? You just never know. And of course it goes against everything that I would say to a person. You just have to go for it, you know. Don't think you're not good enough, you know, when you go for an audition, whether it's an audition to be an actor or a part in a, you know. And if they ask you if you could ride a horse, say yes, of course you can, you know, and go out and learn how to ride a horse, you know, and so on. It was by chance. But the most important thing, it certainly applied to me, was that people liked you. Now, I was of a certain age, and people made the assumption that they could always look at IMDb and see what my record was, you know. And a lot of them, certainly a person who I worked with, knew that I had not too much experience. But she liked me and knew that we would get on well together, and she was a very, very difficult lady. And a lot of people would not work with her. Unfortunately, I didn't know, you know, I mean, I heard of her. And you always knew that when you saw Eileen Diss on a credit, you were going to see the most wonderful production. And she was very difficult. Yet she became one of the closest friends, and I got a call from her, and I thought, my God, you know, how am I going to work with this lady? You know, I don't have the history. Well, I think she wanted someone who didn't have the experience, who would not contradict her, and who she could control. And it was quite true, she could control me. But eventually, of course, I got to know her so well that I was able to contradict her sometimes, and say, I'm sorry, you can't do that. And usually when I said you can't do it, it was for money, because I'm in charge of the budget. And she would always go over budget. And so sadly, as far as the film industry is concerned, I did a promo, and I was nominated for an MTV award, and it was called Don't You Forget About Me, and and then I suddenly got this call, congratulations, and fly to America to Radio City Music Hall. Eddie Murphy was the compere, and I linked arms with Tina Turner. She was one of the entertainers in between the things, and so we all got up at the end and so on and so forth. And so I did quite a lot of promos, and I realized actually the promos I did mostly were with one director, and Danny Kleinman, his name was. And the reason he chose me is because he liked me, and also I think he had not had so much experience either. And I gave the appearance of having more experience. I had to exude a confidence that I didn't feel at all. And when you go into that room to be interviewed by, well, it depends what you are, what your function is, but you could be interviewed by the production manager. You go into that room as if you own the room. Not peek round and apologize for your existence. Everything is this perception of confidence. But more than anything else, and of course as I became much more experienced, of course, I began to choose my own people. And they would send me a CV, I said, I'm not interested in your CV. I said, come in and see me, and I will know when you come in and we have a chat. And what I'm looking for is someone that I can get up in the morning and have breakfast with, like we all have breakfast together, if you're on, and want to see first thing in the morning, and not think, oh my God, I've got to face that person. And so it's your demeanor that is really important. And I see this time and time and time again, whether it's in the movies, whether it's being interviewed for whatever job it is. Okay, of course, people want you to have certain experience. And there again, you can have too much experience, and you can have, you have to, when you sit in front of that person, you have to also to assess who you are sitting in front of. Now that person doesn't want you to overpower that person, because he or she herself, herself, may not have the confidence that they exude. So you have to, it's a psychological balance. And, but again, don't apologize for your existence, I mean, I've learned over all these years, that I mean, I don't have to impress people anymore. When you're much younger, you have to impress people with your personality, with your smile, or with your experience that maybe you don't have. Now I don't have to do that. That's all in the past. But I meet a lot of people, and you know, you always ask sort of certain questions, you know, and I always say, you know, I say what I've said to you about exuding confidence, but not overdoing it, you know, knowing when to withdraw, you know, but not to be a shrinking violet, you know, and how do you know but to be the person that person on the other side of the desk is happy to see every day. At one point, there was again, it was a period when I wasn't working. It was a difficult period. I'd finished my antique business and so on and so forth, and there was an advertisement for a manager of a very smart emporium in South Kensington, near the Victoria and Albert Museum. And so I thought, well, that sounds, you know, absolutely up my street. You know, I'd learned a lot. I'd gone to the auctions, I'd gone to the learning about antiques and art and so on and so forth. You know, you could never learn enough about that. And so I went and was interviewed by Wilfred Bull and Patsy Bull, and they had a big business in the countryside, but this one was artifacts for decorators, which were very flamboyant, and I always remember saying to them that I believe that if you are employed to run a business, you should run the business as if you own the business. And that, I think, was the thing that impressed them most of all. What they didn't know was that I would run that business as if I owned it. I don't mean they chose the most, they had no idea, of course, but they chose probably the most honest person they could have chosen. There are lots of opportunities to, you know, do not good things. I never once did that. Also, I was very good at writing to the press and making up stories about a particular object. I would embroider it a little. And so I have lots of write-ups from antique writers in the evening, in the Observer, in the Daily Telegraph, and in newspapers. And always they would say, the charming and knowledgeable Mark Rimmell. Well, charming maybe, knowledgeable, perhaps not so much. And so constantly there would be write-ups, and they would always mention my name, but they would also mention the name of the shop, but they would never mention the man who owned it, which was Wilfred Bull. And his wife became completely paranoid. And she lived about an hour and a half away, and she'd come with this newspaper. Where's my husband's name? Fucking Mark Rimmell, that's all we read about. And I said, Patsy, they interview me. The name of the shop, Thomas Humphrey, which is the name of their 2 children. I said, is there? I said, you know, what can I do? I can't tell them what to put into their thing. And I said, you're making the money. I'm not making the money. I make 1% plus a wage, you know. And so she got to dislike me intensely. I mean, really, just took so much against me. Although I was doing my job. I was running the business as if I owned it. I didn't have to sit and write letters to the press with photographs and stories and so on and so forth, but I did all that. And this brought the people in. We had people from all over the world coming, you know, and but I was the one that was the front man, you know. And so eventually, after 5 years, I thought, I can't stand this anymore, you know. I mean, it's ridiculous. And also, I had an opportunity to do something else, and I also had money. I don't mean a lot of money, but you know, I could rest for 6 months and I would still be able to live, you know. So I left, and with ringing in my ears, where is my husband's name? I never see my husband's name in the newspaper. Well, 4 months later, I'm walking along Oxford Street, which is the big street in London, and the Evening Standard has a board with the headlines, you know, what the important things that have happened. And the headline was, "Antique dealer's wife shot to death." I thought, wow, I wonder who that could be, because I know by now many people. So I bought the evening paper, and there was the picture of Patsy shot to death. I thought, shit. The next day I bought the paper, "Antique dealer's wife arrested for murder." And it was Wilfred. At last he had his name in the newspaper. And he was given life in prison. But of course life doesn't mean life. He is now out. And what happened was that they had a big warehouse, and they had 2 children, and dinner was cooking, and Patsy was a partner, you know, did work in the warehouse as well, and it was dinner time, and the meal was cooked, and Wilfred rang the warehouse, and there's no response. So he said to Thomas, "Go and tell your mother that dinner is ready." Now he sent his son to the warehouse, knowing that his son would discover his mother dead, because Wilfred had shot her. And he thought that nobody could believe that a man would send his son, you know, to discover. But that's what happened. And so, you know, there are lots of stories, you know.
In your opinion, what are the key qualities or habits that contribute to a person's success?
Well, to my personal success was, I think, my demeanor, my personality, because behind all that facade, you know, because my confidence and my charm and my pretense of knowledge was a facade. And this applied to, I think, almost everything across the board, whatever it was, that people liked me. And it's so important for people to like you, but you have to be the man who goes for an interview, an actor, for example, who they ask, "Can you ride a motorbike?" Well, you've never ridden a motorbike in your life before. And they say, "Yes." Well, I'm the man who would go and say, "Yes, I could ride a motorbike." And so we all see people, maybe in a party, a crowd of people, and immediately you are drawn to one person. And you just know, sometimes for example, when I was on the metro, not here particularly, but in London, and the doors would open and the person wouldn't get on the train, they're waiting for the next train, and you knew that if I only knew that person, we would get to like each other. And so my own personal success came from being open, being honest, and most important of all, of being a good human being. To be kind to people. I mean, success is generic anyway, you know. It's a perception. You know, your demeanor, your attitude, your air of success. I think that's what I possessed that a lot of people don't have. I see it every day when I walk along the street, and you see this closed personality that says nothing about them at all. When I walk through a door, certainly to be interviewed or to in a production, the perception is that this is a man that I could work with and that I will like. You know, I mean, it's just, it's quite simple. Well, the idea is quite simple, but the actually achieving it can be quite difficult. Not for me, because this is the way I am. Well, they have to rehearse it. Rehearse in front of a mirror, if necessary. There are people that will never have it, that will just have they fail before they put their foot in the door, because they know they are not you have to remember that only you know your background, not the other person. And yet they walk through the door as if the person can see through them, and they cannot. What is on your face is what is important. If you're lucky enough, is to do your research. Now, if you know who you are being interviewed by, do your research on the person who you are being interviewed by, so you know their background, and you can maybe even pull a little piece of their background out that, oh, by the way, I have, I just wanted to congratulate you on the so-and-so and so-and-so, or whatever, but pull a little piece of themselves out that they will feel important, that you have remembered something that happened last year when they received whatever, without going over the top. But do your research, you know, and the research, whatever it is, you know, I mean, I am, when I work, you know, I am, people know me for how particular I am on my research, everything. And people will say, but how will people know? How will people know? This is on screen, of course, you know. And I said, but I will know. And but so, I mean, there's no magic formula to it. I mean, there's a lady I know, and she actually she was always at the rental companies, and she would always go around and talk to people. And I never trusted, I have to say, I never trusted her, because if you let her know that you were working with a certain person, she would be on the telephone next day to that person and try and take the job away from you. And she did. And she's now one of the best set decorators and has won 2 Oscars. Yet I know underneath it all, she was a very, very nervous sort of person, but she overcame this nervousness to, well, you've got to be tough as well. You just have to be tough. I think I can't say any more than that, you know. I'm always suspicious when I go into a production meeting, because when you're doing a movie, you have production meetings, and so you will have a production meeting as the shooting schedule gets closer. It may be every week, and I am always suspicious because in this drawer, the drawer over there, there are A3 notebooks. They're all black covers. I insist on black covers. It's just a thing with me, you know. And it's filled with notes. And when I go into a meeting and I look around and I see someone without a notebook, I think I have to be careful of that person, because they are not going to be successful. They don't take notes. Now, that's maybe my personal opinion, but anybody who doesn't take notes will not be on my side at all, and I will not be on their side, shall I say. And just everything, every item, every little. A director will come up to you maybe and ask you, why have you put that there? It doesn't seem to go with everything else, and you have to have an answer for it, you know. I mean, I don't know whether that answers your question at all, but, you know, the devil is in the detail. And you just have to convince people that you know, there may be 20 people up for that job that you're going to do, and you have to make sure that you're the one that they choose. But how you do that is, well, it's difficult, of course, but you have to exude a confidence that you don't actually feel, maybe, you know. And I learned to do it. I learned how important it was. And study people all the time, study people. Of course, I'm talking now about being in the movies. And quite often I would have to give or make sure that people had, the extras who are walking by are carrying something or not carrying something. And I would spend 3-4 hours sitting on a park bench and watching everybody going by. They're carrying a stick or something, or they're carrying a briefcase, or they're carrying just all the detail. Everything is just important. And I don't really think I'm making very much sense at all, but above all is that the person likes you. You have to remember that the first 20 seconds when you go and meet whatever job it is, that first 20 seconds you are won or lost. The other time is wasted. Because the other person, who we assume is experienced and so on, will know immediately. Will know immediately the way you open the door and walk and sit down. But to be open and to be honest as well. People can see false, you know, before they, you know, they just know immediately. First 20 seconds, 30 seconds, if you like, you know. I mean, one of the most important words to me is kindness. When I think about the life I've lived, which has been obviously quite long now, and so I'm doing a series of things for this small town of mine. They have a magazine, and so they want me to do a letter, and I've called it Looking Back. And when I look back from when I was in a children's home, I was in a children's home from when I was 2 years old until I was 7 years old. And everything that I have done, everything that I am, the good and the bad things, because, you know, it's a cocktail of everything. There are things that I've done that I am not proud of. Not many, but in fact very few, but so few that they poke out like nails, and I would never ever talk about it, and sort of a little bit ashamed about it. Nothing terrible. I mean, really, but for me they were terrible because they were so against my nature. But you know, Aristotle. I looked this up too because I wondered where this phrase came from, and I believe it came from Aristotle, and it says, "Give me the boy until he is 7, and I will give you the man." Well, of course it could be girl, but then, you know, we're talking, you know, in a male society. And everything that I have, that I am, that I've been, that I've done, I can go back to my children's home. And I left when I was 7 years old. And everything I can go back, and it's there that it all began. The little boy that came. I was with a home with girls. I don't know why they put me in a home with girls, but I was only 2 years old. And then they brought a little boy, little Reggie, who had a mental, he has, you know, a problem. And I looked after him. I could only have been maybe 5 years old, but I looked after him all the time. And I have, all through my life, looked after, well, I looked after my mum and dad, of course, until they passed away and so on. And so this business of kindness is, I know it's a simple little word, but I mean, that's just a very important word to me anyway. And but certainly, if you want to succeed in anything, you just have to be. Obviously, you have to study your subject, and also, but not only your subject, but people. Understand people. Unfortunately, you know, the world we're living in with this, these machines, you know. People don't understand people anymore. They only understand machines. And I was fortunate enough to be about when there were no machines, and you had to actually deal with people. And we're losing that. I have never mastered, and this is a very good thing for a person to master, is names. I forget people's names. Now, Anthony Hopkins will remember everybody's name, however low they are. And I remember when we had making a movie with Anthony and with Tony, that is, Call Me Tony. It was. He remembered everybody's name. And he is a very rare creature in the film industry, in that he is not only an incredible artist, except he has this habit. One day they will find me out, you know, that he is not a good actor at all. Of course he is, you know. But he remembers, and that's really very important, if you can remember people's names. That's why they call, in the film industry, they call them the lovies. I don't know whether you've heard this expression, the lovies. Well, if you're in theatre and all that sort of stuff, you meet somebody, "Hi, love, how are you?" Well, the reason you say love is because you can't remember their name. And it's really important. At the end of a film, you have a wrap party, a party to celebrate the end of the movie, and everybody will be there. And there are certain people that I've worked with, yet I think, oh God, I know I won't remember their names, so I have a card. And so I write, production manager, accountant, assistant accountant, da-da-da-da-da, and I see them, and I make a point, because this could be very good for the next time. I take it out of my pocket, and I know that that's the assistant production manager, and so I think, oh, assistant. John, how are you? You know, good to see you. You know, it's been a great time, and that was it. That's it, you know. But remember people's names is very, very useful. Well, the thing is not because usually if there's, you know, if there's a crisis or whatever it is, it's not only you that's involved. You know, it's you're surrounded by it. You know, everybody is. You can see the fear in their eyes. You know, it's like an oncoming train. You know, and you can feel the panic. Well, you must be the one that doesn't. You know, and never allow people to see the fear in your, you know, that you are terrified. And everybody, it happens to everybody. I've watched people, usually on a film, for example, I could only quote films, of course, and you're given maybe, it depends on the length of the film, 6 weeks or 10 weeks or 12 weeks or 15 weeks preparation. And it begins all gentle and so on and so forth. And as it gets closer and closer, you can see the panic setting in. Well, you must be the one that doesn't panic or doesn't allow people to see it, you know, and exude a confidence that you don't feel at all, but can actually spread out like a magic carpet. And then you find actually that other people will become less concerned, if you like. You know, we're all concerned, you know. And the first week of filming is the most important because particularly if you're working with a director that you've never worked with before, you have to make absolutely certain that during that first week you do not make a mistake. And that's because if you make a mistake in the first week, you have lost the confidence of the director. And if you lose the confidence of the director, then it is very, very difficult to pull it back. And also to understand that everybody is feeling what you're feeling, that you're not unique in your being almost terrified. I've heard this time and time again with very famous people, you know, but I'm terrified. Judi Dench, for example, you know, said when I'm about to go on, this probably happens with a play or something, but it also happens with a production. You know, before the production happened, she said, I'm absolutely terrified that this is the one where they're going to find me out, that I'm going to not produce what they expect of me. And I feel the same way. And having spoken to many, many other people in my group, if they're honest, they feel the same way too. But unfortunately, one of the things in the film industry that you will never find, well, you will occasionally, is loyalty. There is no loyalty at all. Just when you need some support, you will find an empty room. They've gone. They've disappeared. Now I have this lady who I worked with and everybody was terrified of, who was Eileen Dis, for example, and she was the most loyal person that I've ever come across. But people are not loyal at all. And directors, producers, production managers, they will just drop you and forget you. And I've always said to people, never, never be like that, you know. And this is again coming back to being a good human being. I see people who are coming into the industry. I don't mean now because I'm not in the industry, but I can see that they are almost shaking with fear because they are asked to do something and they have no idea. And I pull them on one side. And if I have my own office, I said, look, come in, bring a cup of coffee and sit down. And I said, look, I can see what you're going through. And we all go through it, you know. And I said, if you have a problem, asked to do something that you have no idea, you do not understand it, come to me, and it'll be between you and me, nobody else. But loyalty is something that almost doesn't exist in the film industry, and I've had that myself, you know, and suffered from it. And suddenly you find that something happens and it's ended on your desk, and it's nothing to do with you at all. You know, something as whatever, and so they said, well, you know, Rimmell did so and so and so and so, you know, and Rimmell didn't do it at all. But you say, okay, I take it on board. We'll solve the problem, you know. But certainly loyalty is one of the great. Is something you will not find at all. That's except Tony Hopkins. You would find loyalty with Tony. You'll find loyalty with Judi Dench, and I mean, when my mother was alive, this is not my real mother. My real mother was Russian, actually, and she escaped from Russia and went to Palestine, and she was unlucky enough to marry an English soldier. And my sister was born in Palestine. She died some years ago, and then I was born in the little slum area in London, and then my father disappeared, and he'd met somebody else and who was pregnant, and he wanted to get married, and the only way to get married was divorce. My mother would never divorce him. She was not that it was her religion or anything, but she was married to him, you know, and had 2 children. So I was 2 years old, and so he went to he worked on the riverboats because he was dismissed from the army. And he worked on the riverboats, and in London at the time, we're talking 1935, you didn't have containers then, you know. The ships would moor up out at sea, and then small boats, my father being in charge of one of the boats, would then unload the ships and then bring them up the river. And so he was a riverboat man. And so, of course, they had every opportunity of stealing things and so on and so forth. And so he was a bit of a thief and not a nice man, I think. I never met him, of course. Well, I would remember, 2 years old. And so what was the answer to his problem, you know, to get a divorce? And so one of his friends said, well, if you have a £5 note. He said, well, what do I do with a £5 note? He said, you take it to this doctor, and the doctor will give you, in exchange for the £5 note, a certificate to say that your wife, my mother's name was Mina Lebedev, well, Mina Rimmell, but Lebedev before she was married, Mina Lebedev, he will give you a certificate to say that she is insane. And so that's what he did. And so the van came, the police came, smashed the door in. They took my mother to the insane asylum, put her in a straitjacket. She had no idea what was happening. what was happening to her was worse than what had happened in Russia with the pogroms. And she was taken into this insane asylum just outside London, 3,000 people on 5 floors with 6 miles of corridors, and she was put into a cell, and she thought she was in prison. She had no idea. And the reason I know a lot about this is because eventually she died, and many people died, and that were buried in a pit on the perimeters of this insane asylum. It's called the Coney Hatch Insane Asylum. And when the father disappeared, my mother went to the rabbi. Rabbi Chepachnik, his name was. And the reason I know that is because on her death certificate, she was lucky enough, but she had a funeral, but it was a pauper's funeral paid for by the state. And so she was buried in the Jewish cemetery, and then I was taken, so she was taken to the insane asylum, and I was taken to the children's home. My sister was taken to another children's home. That's how I came into the children's home. And I didn't know my name at all. I had no idea. I didn't know I had a mother. I didn't know I had a father. And I mean, how much do you know when you're 2 years old? I'm not sure. And but certainly during the period, I guess it must have been, you call it post-traumatic stress syndrome now, because she wrapped us in a blanket. She heard the smashing of the doors like you would in Russia with the pogroms. And so apparently she wrapped my sister and I in a blanket and hid us under she had a tall bed, and she hid us under the bed, well, of course. Sure. And so we were grabbed by the police, and then there was a van. Well, no, there was the van to take my mother, and then 2 cars, one to take my sister and one to take me to a children's home. And so I never knew my name until one Christmas. I don't, it's difficult to, it's such a long time ago, and but I guess every year they had a Christmas party, and then they give out parcels, your name is on it, and they gave me this parcel, and for the first time I saw my name. And of course it wasn't Mark, because I wasn't born Mark, I was born Arthur Frederick, and I didn't like either of those names, so I changed it. And so Father Christmas comes up and gives, and each label had a name on it, and my name apparently was called out, but I didn't recognize this name. I didn't know my name until somebody next to me said, "Go get your parcel," and they ripped the paper off, and there's a toy inside, but I didn't rip the paper off. There's a label like that, and it's got my name on it. And I didn't care about what was inside the parcel. What I cared about was what was written on the label, my name. And it was the first time that I'd ever seen my name. And I put it in my pocket, and I put it under my pillow until it wore away and went. And these sort of incidents, of course, can make you sort of bitter about life, and angry about life and all that stuff. But it did quite the opposite to me. It made me determined to, I think, from that moment, to help other people. And I was with Samaritan. Have you ever heard of Samaritans? Well, I was with Samaritans for 5 years when I was in London, yeah. So I know quite a lot about Samaritans. And then I couldn't, you had to be absolutely, my duty was on Friday, and then you had a night duty. That was the worst of all, the night duties, because that's when you got the serious telephone calls, you know. Not that the others were not serious, they were, but, you know, in the middle of the night when somebody is desperate, you know, and they call, and but you're well trained for all this, you know. It takes at least a couple of years before I was allowed to be on a night duty. I was terrified, you know, because you have a senior in charge, and then after a while I became the senior, and you get this phone call, and but I had to leave because I couldn't guarantee that I could be there because work had come, you know. And then I had to go into hospital for an operation. Not a desperate, serious one, but I had to go privately because the health service I had to go when it suited me, you know, and I had the money to do it, and so I went. And it was a Catholic hospital, but it was anybody could go, you know, and so on. And they had a hospice. Downstairs was a hospice, and I learned about the hospice because I won the raffle. They came round, these nurses came round. I had a private room, of course, because that's what I was paying for. And these two nuns came round with a raffle ticket, and I was on morphine. The pain was, you know, so I was really a bit out of it. And so I gave them, and then later on they bought me a bottle of whiskey. And so I said, well, what was it for? They said, well, downstairs we have a hospice, and we're trying to raise money to extend it, you know. And so I'd heard about the hospice, but I didn't know too much about it. So I said to the Mother Superior, I said, when I'm better and I can walk, you know, can it's only 10 days, I was only there for 10 days. And I said, can I just go and just have a look at, you know, I said, I don't mean to be, just out of curiosity, you know. She said, yes. So I went down, and then I found myself saying, well, I have to go away for a month for convalescence for this operation. And I said, do you ever need any volunteers? They said, oh my God, you know, we don't have any men at all. We do have a few ladies that come in that help to feed and to, you know, talk. So I came after a month. I did go back, and Mother Superior, who I got to know really well, she said, everybody always says they want to come and help, and they never do, and said, you came. And so I was there for 3 years. And then the films came along, and so of course it was just impossible. And so I was, I learned a lot about, you know, because the hospice movement in London was founded by a lady named Dame Cicely Saunders. That's her name. She was made a dame, you know. And she had this phrase, unfinished business. And of course I'd never been taught to be but I'd been a Samaritan, so it's a very good training to listen and to talk and to hold somebody's hand, you know, when they cannot talk to you. And an unfinished business is, have you said everything you want to say? Because mostly, maybe they will be there for a month, and that's, you know, and maybe less, of course. And many people don't say "I love you," for example. It's a very difficult phrase for people to articulate to their fathers or to their mothers or their children or their, you know. And I always remember there was this lady, and I always used to watch her. She came, and she would sit with her father, and just like this, and they wouldn't say anything, you know. And so one day I said, would you like to come and have a cup of tea in the tea room, you know? And so I said, I notice, you know, you never ever hold your father's hand. She said, no, I never held his hand at all. I said, well, have you ever told your father that you love him? She said, no. And he's never said that he loves me. I said, well, and it's difficult sometimes for people to realize that time is limited, because a person can look actually quite well, you know, but still the time is limited. And I said, well, you know, time is limited, you know. It's there's not much time left, and you will regret when it's gone and over that you didn't say those 3 words. And she said, so I used to go in twice a week, or 3 times a week, I think. And she'd come out, and I said, and then one day she came out and she was floods of tears. I said, you did it. She said, yes, and my father said that he loved me. I said, it was easy, wasn't it? I said, well, it wasn't easy, I know, but, you know. And so, yeah, and so I learned, I learned a lot from that, particularly when my mum was, well, my mum, fortunately, did not become, but of course I thought about it a lot. The why, you know, the how, the where, the when. And I used to visit my mum. She lived in the countryside, I lived in London. But occasionally I had to go away. But I'd made this wonderful garden in memory of my mum, dad. And so we had this wonderful rose garden. And so we were able to talk about father through the rose garden. Do you know what I mean? Oh, one of father's roses had died. Okay, Mum, come on, let's go and let's sort father out at the weekend and buy a nice rose, and so on and so forth. So we were always talking about it. And I realized, too, that as Mum got older, she became 90 years old, and she's working in the garden all the time. And I used to say goodbye to I parked my car. My mum never realized this, but I parked my car here, and the little house was here, and I would go round the corner. So it meant that as I turned the corner, I could wave at my mum. And I used to say, you know, is this the last weekend? Because one day it will be the last weekend. And how will it happen? When will it happen? You know, how will it happen, you know? Am I going to get a phone call to say she's in hospital? Am I going to get a phone call to say that da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da? And then I was working with Judy Dench, and we were filming on a Sunday. And so I was going to have to be working, and I said to my mum, you know, I won't be able to come home at the weekend. But always I telephoned her. I put a telephone in. I had to teach my mum how to use this telephone. She didn't know which end to use. But anyway, eventually it was, you know, it was no problem. And so I telephoned her on Thursday, which I always did, 8 o'clock. Time is important, you know, 8 o'clock. When you get older, you know, it must be rigid, you know. And so, and I said, oh, you'll be shopping tomorrow, Mum, you know. Oh, no, I can't. I won't be shopping tomorrow because... I said, well, you always shop on a Friday. And I said, well, I don't know, I don't feel so well. I thought, my gosh. So I said to the designer, this is this Eileen Diss, who is this difficult but wonderful lady, and I said, look, I've got to go home, and it's just so unusual, you know, for my mum not to go shopping, you know. So I went on the Saturday morning, and apparently she'd been working in the garden until 9 o'clock at night on Friday night, and she went to bed, and I had to get a ladder and get in the window, and that was that's how it happened, and what a wonderful way to happen, you know, that you're working until 9 o'clock and you go to bed and you go to sleep and you don't wake up, you know. That must be everybody's prayer, you know, and but anyway, I had to call, you know, because I had to be there for 10 days, you know, to see to everything. And then I said to, I don't think I can continue, you know, with... Eileen said, you've got to come back. Doesn't matter when you come back. You have to continue. Life must go on. Not for me, but for you. And so, anyway, I was able to go back after 10 days, but I said to Eileen, I said, look, when I come back, can people not, you know, just say nothing, just let me continue, you know, because I know I would collapse, fall about. And I kept everything together, you know, but I'd rehearsed it for so long that the tears didn't come like Sophie at all, because I was expecting it. And you know, it was just in my mind, you know. And anyway, I went on the set, and the first person that came up to me, as a matter of fact, was Judy, and she just said, welcome back. That's it. And that was just enough, you know. And yeah, this living and not living is difficult, you know.